Aline says, "Hi love." He greets her and she asks, "Are you off today?" He confirms and she said, "Do you remember that appointment I told you?" Pedro says yes, and she says, "So I'm going to go, and I'm going to take the opportunity to get some test results, and it might take me a while, because of the lab, because they're always late and they say goodbye and leave." Pedro takes his cell phone and says, "Hi my baby, how are you? You can come now, she just left and said goodbye." Moments later, Pedro says, "You don't have any sense even in a girl, you do it to provoke, right?" And she says, "You who have no sense want to do this in your wife's bed and call him close." When he enters he says, "Do you really think I care about my wife?" 2 hours later William says, "What's up my love? Did you like it?" Pedro gets up and says, "Our Lady. It was great, but I just need you to leave, because my wife should be arriving," and asks the girl, "How much is it?" She says, 70 reis love. Does he speak 70? She says, "Yes, it increased dear." He hands her the money and William says, "Thank you. Anything you call me, and say goodbye." Hours later Aline comes home crying a lot and says, "My God, how could this have happened? An STD? And I never cheat on my husband, how am I going to tell him this? But I'll have to." So Pedro approaches and asks what happened Aline. She says, "It's nothing," and he asks, "Why are you crying?" She says, "No love, it's nothing, because of this cold and sunny weather, I have a little flu, that's all," and he asks, "How was the exams there?" And Aline says, "Isn't everything okay?" and Pedro asks, "Is everything okay?" She says yes, and he then asks her to stop crying and go take a medicine that will make you feel better. Aline says she will and leaves. Aline asks, "My God, what am I going to do? And I have to tell this to Pedro, but how am I going to tell this, and if he doesn't want to go to bed at night or doesn't want to have sex with me, but I can't let it, I have to tell him." Later, Pedro enters the room and says, "Our love. I love it when you apply these creams," and she says, "It's love, I just took a shower." She pushes him and he asks, "Don't you want me to come close?" She says, "No love, it's nothing," and he asks, "What's going on Aline? You arrived strange after that appointment," and Aline said, "No, love, I just have a little headache," and Pedro says, "Oh, but it's okay, let's lie here for a while," and Aline says, "No, no," and he says, "What is that Aline?" She says no again and that she doesn't want to and asks for respect, and he says, "Oh, don't you want to?" Annoyed Pedro says, "What do you mean to respect you? We are a couple, and I don't know how many days we haven't made love. You're very absent with me Aline," and she says, "Pedro, calm down. Why are you talking this way?" "I'm just a little unwell," and he asks, "Unwell? Is calm? Sometimes I'm feeling bad, but I don't do this to you, no," and then you don't complain and leaving her alone, and she thinks, there's no way, I better tell him at once and call him, and him says, "Hi Aline," and she asks him to come back to the room. Upon entering, Pedro asks what was it. She says, "I have to tell you something," and asks him to sit down, and Aline says, "Do you remember that I went to that appointment and did some tests?" He says, "I remember," and she says, "So the result of the exam was this one?" Pedro asks, "An STD Aline? Like this?" Aline confirms, but doesn't know why he has an STD, and he asks, "How you got it, Aline?" and she says, "I don't know, but one thing I guarantee you, I've never been with someone else, and you have to believe me, and me, I've never had a relationship with anyone, I just stay with you, and I don't know how it happened, and I can tell you that, but I want to hear from you, I'm so stunned, and you need to tell me the truth. Have you ever hooked up with anyone? Have you ever cheated on me, or been involved with someone without protection? Tell me, I need to know." And he says, "My love, I know it's going to hurt what I have to talk to you about, but that must be why I'm feeling so bad, and I haven't talked to you about it." And Aline says, "Pedro stops beating around the bush and tells me soon," and he says he will. And she asks, "Have you ever cheated on me?" Pedro replied, Aline, the truth is that after we got together and at the beginning it was very good and we were very happy and you were always a very friendly person, you know, and you always gave me the strength to move on with my life. And she asks him to stop to roll and asks what's going on, Pedro? And Pedro says, the problem, Aline, is that you've been away from everything and you're working too much. And he asks, did you stay with another woman? And he says, the truth is that I stayed and went with several people. And she asks, without protection, Pedro? And she, my God, how can you do this even more when you don't take care of yourself and don't have any consideration for me? How did you have the courage to do that? I'm your wife. You brought a disease into the house and the worst infected me. Pedro asks her to forgive him and Aline says, there's no way to apologize, and he asks her to calm down and that it wasn't just his fault, but she too it was his fault, because she did not take care of him and that she had been very absent. And Aline says, Pedro, for me this is very difficult. I love you and you are the love of my life. And again, he apologizes and that it had not been because of him I wanted to, but because he's a man, and says that the day he went out with Tiago, a friend of his, he had gone to a nightclub and that there were several women in that nightclub and we paid, and after that I didn't stop doing it anymore. And Aline says, enough, I don't want to hear that anymore and it hurts me. And Pedro asks for forgiveness and that she didn't deserve that. And she says, I've always been such a good wife. I do everything in the house and I do everything for you and for us, and is this what you give me in return? And Pedro says, I'm sorry, that won't happen anymore, and I already know that I don't even need to do tests, I just have to treat myself and we'll get out of this, but I ask you to forgive me and stay with me. And Aline says, because you did this. And he says, it was all my fault. I don't know why I did all this to you, love. And Aline said, then promise me that you will never betray me again. And he says, I promise that I will never do that to you again. I'm sorry, and I know that from now on we'll have to go through a very serious treatment, but I need you to stay with me because I won't be able to face this alone. Forgive me, you didn't deserve to go through this, and let's take care of it together. And Aline replied, I'm going to try to put a stone on it, and I want you to really appreciate this chance I'm giving you, and please don't do that anymore. And he promises, and they hug. And would you, in her situation, also forgive?